My dad used my college fund to buy his mistress a car, so I told his entire church congregation exactly where their donation money had been going. My father, Robert Chin, was the senior pastor at Cornerstone Megachurch. 3 services every Sunday, 2,000 people per service, live-streamed to thousands more online. He was the kind of preacher who could make grown men cry during altar calls, who people drove 3 hours to hear speak, who got invited to conferences across the country. Growing up as Pastor Chin's son meant living in a fishbowl. Every mistake I made reflected on him and the church. Every decision was filtered through how it would look to the congregation. I learned early to smile during service, to say the right things when church members asked about my life, to perform the role of the perfect pastor's kid. When I was 12, Dad sat me down and told me he'd been saving for my college education since I was born. He showed me the statements. Nearly $200,000 in an education savings account. He said God had blessed him so he could bless me, that I'd never have to worry about student loans or working through school. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? My father was a man of God. He preached about integrity and honesty every Sunday. He counseled hundreds of people through their struggles. He was respected and admired by everyone who knew him. But when I turned 18 and went to access that college fund, the account was empty. Not low, not partially depleted, completely empty. Every single dollar was gone. I confronted Dad in his home office, the one with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves full of theology texts and commentaries. He was sitting at his mahogany desk, preparing his sermon for Sunday. I said, "Where's my college fund?" He didn't look up from his notes. He said, "We'll talk about this later. I'm preparing to deliver God's word." I said, "I need to register for classes next week. Where's the money?" He finally met my eyes. His face had that calm, pastoral expression he used when counseling troubled congregation members. He said, "Son, sometimes God calls us to sacrifice for the greater good." That money went to the church building fund. We needed it more urgently than you needed college right now. I stared at him, processing what he just said. I said, "You took my entire college fund for the church?" He said, I didn't take it. I reallocated it to where God directed. You can take out loans like everyone else. Character is built through struggle, not handed to you on a silver platter. The building fund, the one he'd been preaching about for 2 years. The one that was supposedly for expanding the children's wing and updating the sanctuary sound system. I took out student loans, got a part-time job, watched my friends from church, whose parents hadn't stolen their college funds, enjoy the traditional college experience while I worked 30 hours a week and studied in whatever time was left. Dad's sermons that year were full of stories about sacrifice and faith, about Abraham being willing to sacrifice Isaac, about how God honors those who give everything for his kingdom. The congregation ate it up. Donations to the building fund increased. 3 years passed. I was a junior in college, drowning in debt and exhaustion, when I came home for Christmas break and saw something that changed everything. My younger sister Emma, 16 and still naive enough to believe Dad was perfect, was showing me photos on her phone. Pictures from her friend's sweet 16 party. Normal teenage stuff. Then she showed me a photo that made my stomach drop. It was taken at a restaurant downtown. In the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was my father, sitting in a booth with a woman I didn't recognize. His hand was covering hers on the table. They were looking at each other the way people in love look at each other. I said, "Who's that?" Emma squinted at the photo. She said, "I don't know. Some lady." "Why?" I said, "No reason." But there was a reason. Because I just realized where my college fund had really gone. I started watching Dad more carefully after that. Noticed the new patterns. The late Tuesday meetings that ran until 11. The Saturday morning counseling sessions that took 3 hours. The phone calls he took in his car in the driveway. I hired a private investigator with money I should have been using for textbooks. Her name was Rachel Summers, 28 years old. She'd started attending Cornerstone 2 years ago, right around when my college fund disappeared. She volunteered in the church office, helped coordinate events. Everyone loved her energy and enthusiasm for ministry. The investigator's report came back with photos. Dad and Rachel at restaurants in the next town over. Dad and Rachel going into a condo in a complex I didn't recognize. Dad and Rachel kissing in his car in a grocery store parking lot. And the financial records, those were the most damning. The condo was in Rachel's name, but Dad paid the rent. $1,500 a month for the past 2 years. He'd bought her a car 18 months ago, a brand new Honda Accord, $35,000 paid in cash. I added it up. The condo rent alone was $36,000. The car was $35,000. That was $71,000, plus furniture for the condo, dinners out, gifts, travel. The investigator estimated at least $100,000 spent on Rachel over 2 years. Half of my college fund. I sat in my dorm room with these documents spread across my desk and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. My father had preached about adultery being a grievous sin, had counseled dozens of couples through affairs, had told his congregation that integrity meant doing the right thing even when no one was watching, and he'd stolen from his own son to fund his affair. I flew home the next weekend, telling Mom I needed to grab some winter clothes. She was in the kitchen making her famous pot roast, humming along to worship music on the radio. I said, "Is Dad home?" She said, "He's at the church. Board meeting tonight. Should be back around 9. I went up to their bedroom. To Dad's closet specifically. In the back, behind his dress shoes, was a lockbox I'd seen once when I was 13. He'd told me it was for important documents. I picked the lock with tools I'd ordered online. Inside were bank statements for an account I didn't know existed. Transfers from the church's general fund to his personal account, disguised as pastoral allowance increases. Receipts for jewelry I'd never seen Mom wear. Credit card statements for a card in Rachel's name that he was paying off every month. And an envelope full of photos. Dad and Rachel on what looked like a vacation. Beach photos. Hotel room photos. photos that made me feel sick to look at. I took pictures of everything with my phone, put it all back exactly as I'd found it. Went downstairs and had dinner with Mom like nothing was wrong. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision. Dad had used his position of authority and trust to steal from me, to lie to his family, to betray his vows and his calling. He'd hidden behind the church, behind God, behind his reputation. So I'd expose him where it would hurt most, in front of the people whose respect he valued above everything. Sunday morning, I arrived at church early. Dad was already there, of course, greeting people in the lobby like always. Shaking hands, asking about people's weeks, praying with anyone who needed it. He saw me and smiled. He said, "Didn't know you were coming this weekend. Good to see you, son." I smiled back. I said I wouldn't miss it. The sanctuary filled up, 2,000 people finding their seats. The worship team led 3 songs. Announcements were made about upcoming events. Then it was time for Dad's sermon. He walked up to the pulpit looking confident and prepared, opened his Bible, started preaching about Joseph and how God blessed him despite betrayal and hardship. Dad said, sometimes God allows us to go through valleys so we can appreciate the mountaintops. Joseph was thrown in a pit by his own brothers, but he trusted God anyway. I stood up from my seat in the 3rd row. The worship leader at the soundboard knew me. We'd been friends since youth group. I'd texted him that morning asking for a favor, told him I wanted to share a testimony during service. He'd gotten me a wireless microphone. I turned it on. I said, "Can I share something, Dad?" The sanctuary went quiet. 2,000 people turned to look at me. Dad's face went pale. He said, "Son, this isn't the time." I said, "I think it is. You've been preaching about betrayal and trust, about how God sees everything even when people don't. I think the congregation should know what God's been seeing." I pulled out my phone, connected it to the church's projection system using a cable I'd brought specifically for this. The investigators' photos appeared on the massive screens flanking the stage. Dad and Rachel at dinner. Dad and Rachel going into the condo. Dad and Rachel kissing. Gasps rippled through the sanctuary. Someone in the back started crying. I could see Mom in the front row, her face crumpling as she stared at the screens. I said, "This is Rachel Summers. She's been my dad's mistress for 2 years. He pays for her condo. He bought her a car. Want to know where that money came from?" I pulled up the bank statements, showed the transfers from the church account to his personal account, the payments to Rachel's landlord, the car purchase receipt. I said, "Some of it came from the church's general fund. The money you all donate thinking it's going to ministry and missions. But a lot of it came from my college fund. The one my dad told me he'd been saving since I was born. He spent it on his girlfriend instead." Dad was backing away from the pulpit, his face ashen. The board members in the front row were on their feet. Someone was shouting. The worship leader had cut the microphone feed, but the damage was done. I disconnected my phone and walked down the aisle toward the exit. People were trying to stop me to ask questions, but I kept moving. Behind me, I could hear chaos erupting. Shouting, crying, the sound of a church imploding. Mom caught up with me in the parking lot. Her makeup was running down her face. She grabbed my arm. She said, "Why? Why would you do this here? In front of everyone?" I said, "Because he's been lying here in front of everyone for 2 years. I just told the truth." She said, "You've destroyed everything. The church, your father's ministry, our family. Do you understand what you've done?" I pulled my arm free. I said, I understand perfectly. Dad destroyed it first. I just made sure everyone knew." I drove back to school that afternoon. My phone exploded with calls and texts. From church members. From family friends. From Emma, who was furious with me for humiliating Dad publicly. The local news picked up the story by Monday. They ran clips from someone's cell phone video of my revelation. Dad's face on every news channel, frozen in that moment of recognition and horror. The church board met that night. They called an emergency congregational meeting for Wednesday. By then, I'd sent them everything. All the financial records, all the photos, the private investigator's full report. Dad was removed from his position immediately. The board launched a full audit of church finances. It turned out the $100,000 he'd spent on Rachel was just the beginning. He'd been embezzling for years, small amounts that added up to nearly $500,000. Mom filed for divorce. Emma wasn't speaking to me. Extended family members called me everything from brave to vindictive to cruel. I sat in my dorm room watching my family disintegrate on social media and waited to feel vindicated, triumphant, justified. Instead, I felt hollow. My roommate, Josh, found me staring at my phone at 2 in the morning 3 days later. The guilt had started creeping in. Not about exposing Dad's affair or the embezzlement. Those things deserve to be exposed. But about the method. About destroying him in front of 2,000 people. About the nuclear option when there might have been other ways. Josh said, "You okay?" I said, "I don't know." He sat down on his bed across from me. He said, "I want to talk about it?" I told him everything. About finding the empty college fund. About the affair. About Sunday's revelation. About how I'd thought I'd feel satisfied but instead felt like I'd become something cruel. He said, "Do you regret it?" I said, "I regret how I did it. Not that I did it. Does that make sense?" He said, "Yeah, it does." My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway. A woman's voice said, "Is this David Shin?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "This is Patricia Morrison. I'm a member at Cornerstone." Was a member, I guess. "I wanted you to know that your father counseled my daughter through her divorce 3 years ago. He told her that adultery was an unforgivable sin, that her husband had broken the covenant, that she should leave him immediately." I didn't know what to say. She said she did leave him. Lost custody of her kids because she couldn't afford a good lawyer. Your father's advice destroyed her family. And the whole time, he was doing the same thing. I needed you to know that what you did Sunday saved other people from his hypocrisy, even if it didn't feel good. She hung up before I could respond. Over the next week, more calls came. More stories. People Dad had counseled with his holier-than-thou attitude while living a double life. couples he'd condemned for smaller transgressions, church members he'd made feel shame for struggles he was hiding himself. I realized that my revelation hadn't just been about revenge or justice for my stolen college fund. It had been about stopping him from hurting more people. But I also realized I'd hurt people too. Mom didn't deserve to find out about her husband's affair projected on giant screens in front of her entire community. Emma didn't deserve to have her family torn apart in such a public, humiliating way. The church split. About half the congregation left feeling betrayed. The other half stayed, determined to rebuild. They hired a new pastor, implemented financial oversight, created accountability systems that should have existed from the beginning. Mom moved in with her sister. Emma transferred to a school in another district where no one knew who she was. Dad disappeared from public life entirely. Last I heard, he and Rachel had moved to another state. I finished college with the help of the lawsuit settlement. The church's insurance paid out for the embezzled funds, and I got back my college money plus damages. It felt like blood money. I donated half to a scholarship fund for pastors' kids. 2 years passed. I graduated, got a job, started building a life that didn't revolve around church scandal and family drama. Then Mom called me. She said, "Your father wants to meet with you." My first instinct was to say no, but something in Mom's voice stopped me. I said, "Why?" She said, "He's been in therapy. Real therapy, not the performative counseling he used to do. He says he needs to make amends." I told him I didn't think you'd want to see him, but he asked me to ask anyway. I said, "Are you asking me to see him? Or is this just passing along the message?" She said, "I'm asking. Not for him. For you. I think you need closure as much as he needs forgiveness." We met at a coffee shop in a town neither of us lived in anymore. Neutral territory. Dad looked different. Older. Smaller somehow. He'd lost weight. His hair had gone gray. We sat across from each other at a corner table, both holding coffee neither of us was drinking. He said, "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond. He said, "I've spent 2 years in therapy trying to understand how I became the person who stole from his son and betrayed his wife. How I justified it all in my head as serving God." I said, "And?" He said, "I was a narcissist hiding behind religion. I used God as cover for my own ego and desires. I told myself I deserved special treatment because I was doing God's work, that normal rules didn't apply to me." I said, "You destroyed a lot of people, Dad." He said, "I know. I destroyed you first. You were 12 when I started planning the embezzlement. I looked at my son and decided my wants were more important than your future. I can't undo that." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. I said, "Why'd you do it? Not the affair or the stealing. Why'd you become a pastor if you were just going to be a hypocrite?" He was quiet for a long time. He said, "I became a pastor because I was good at it. People respected me, listened to me, needed me." Somewhere along the way, I started believing my own performance. Started thinking that if people saw me as holy, I must actually be holy. I said, "That doesn't make it better." He said, "I know. Nothing makes it better. I'm not here asking for forgiveness. I'm here to tell you that what you did that Sunday, as painful as it was, might have saved my life. I was spiraling into something dark. If you hadn't stopped me, I don't know where I'd be now." I said, "So I should feel good about destroying our family in front of 2,000 people?" He said, "No. You should feel however you feel. But you should know that your mother and I have been talking. Going to counseling together. Not to reconcile romantically, but to heal from what I did to her. Emma's in therapy too. We're all trying to recover from the damage I caused." I took a sip of my coffee which had gone cold. I said, "I don't forgive you." He said, "I don't expect you to. But I hope someday you can forgive yourself for the guilt you're carrying about how you exposed me. You were 20 years old and angry. You reacted the only way you knew how." I said, "How did you?" He said, "Your mom told me you've been having nightmares. That you call her at 3 in the morning asking if Emma will ever talk to you again. That you've been carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you." He reached across the table, not to touch me but to leave an envelope. He said, "This is a letter I wrote. You don't have to read it now or ever. But it explains everything I stole, who I hurt and why. I thought you might want to know the full truth, not just the pieces you uncovered." I took the envelope but didn't open it. We finished our coffee in silence. Before I left, I asked him one more question. I said, "Do you still believe in God, after everything?" He smiled sadly. He said, I believe in a God who's bigger than my betrayal, who's patient enough to wait for me to stop performing and start being real. Whether that God wants anything to do with me anymore, I don't know. But I'm trying to find out." I drove home and opened the letter. It was 20 pages, single-spaced, every lie detailed, every person hurt named, every dollar stolen accounted for. At the end, he'd written something that made me cry. He wrote that he didn't blame me for what I did, that he blamed himself for making it necessary, that I'd shown more courage at 20 than he'd shown in his entire life. He wrote that he hoped I could build a life free from the weight of his failures. I called Mom that night. I said I saw him. She said, "Yeah, I know. How do you feel?" I said, confused, angry, sad, all of it at once. She said, "That's normal. You don't have to figure it all out right now." I said, "Do you think Emma will ever forgive me?" Mom was quiet. She said, "I think Emma needs time. She lost her dad as a hero and her brother as someone she trusted, all in the same moment. But she's in therapy and she's processing everything. Give her time." 6 months later, Emma called me. She said, "I'm ready to talk." We met at the same coffee shop where I'd met Dad. She looked different, more grown up, less naive. She said, I hated you. For a really long time, I hated you for ruining everything." I said, I understand." She said, "But my therapist helped me see that you didn't ruin anything. Dad ruined it. You just exposed what was already broken. I was mad at you because it was easier than being mad at him." I said, "Are you still mad at me?" She said, "He sometimes. But I'm also grateful you did it. He would have kept going, kept lying, kept hurting people. You stopped him. We talked for 3 hours, about everything that happened, about how we both felt, about how to move forward. She asked me if I regretted doing it the way I did. I said every day. I regret humiliating Mom. I regret hurting you. I regret that I did it publicly instead of going to the board privately. She said, would it have worked if you'd gone to the board? I said, I don't know. Maybe not. Dad had a lot of power there. She said, then maybe you did what you had to do. I wanted to believe her, but I knew I'd live with the guilt of that Sunday for the rest of my life. Not guilt about exposing Dad. Guilt about the collateral damage. About Mom's face on those screens. About Emma's humiliation at school. About the church members who'd done nothing wrong but lost their spiritual home anyway. That's the thing they don't tell you about revenge. Even when it's justified, even when the person deserved it, even when good comes from it eventually, you still carry the weight of what you did. You still wake up at 3 in the morning wondering if there was a better way. I'll never know if there was. All I know is that I'm not my father. I don't hide behind righteousness while doing wrong. When I hurt people, I own it. When I'm wrong, I admit it. And maybe that's enough. Maybe living with the guilt and learning from it is better than living without conscience at all. 3 years after that Sunday, I got married. Mom came. Emma was a bridesmaid. Dad sent a card with a check for exactly $200,000. My college fund, finally paid back with interest. I donated it all to a foundation for students whose parents had stolen from them. Kept only enough to pay off my remaining student loans. Because I didn't want his money. I wanted to be free of him and everything he represented. And finally I was